Well, I'll only take 1 second of your time and then get on to the interesting stuff. So my name's Clayton Blake. I'm from Toucan Labs. So we are like the technical custodian of OpenEyes. So what we do, we're responsible for implementation and supports on a global scale. We're not the only people that do it. There are other people that do it, but we're the official the official technical custodian. So we're responsible for getting OpenEyes into all 4 corners of the earth. So what we're going to do today is we can give you a demonstration of OpenEyes. I can talk a little bit about the technical aspects, the implementation, and how we support and the ways of working. I'll leave that to the end. There's also was some interest in possibly the referrals stuff that we've got, and also the imaging diagnostics. So I can give a little demonstration on that sort of stuff as well. But the main event is the OpenEyes. So I'll, without further ado, I guess I'll hand over to Ian. Just checking if you're okay with that format, or if anyone wants to change it. Silence is acceptance. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen, and Ian, if you can start sharing yours. Now I can come back and do a I can do a presentation a little bit later. So if I open share tray, and I'm done. So that looks like
sharing now.
Yeah, that's perfect. I can see it all.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you fine.
All right. Great. Okay, so I'll crack on. So I'm Ian Rodriguez. I'm a consultant ophthalmologist in London at St Thomas's Hospital. I self-specialise in glaucoma. I am what I would call a tech enthusiast. So I love having new technology in terms of phone, computers, cars, stuff like that. But I'm definitely not a tech geek. I don't know how to code or build websites or anything overly technical. I've kind of learned a little bit over the last few years as I've been more involved with OpenEyes. But I'm just a normal clinician. So just some disclosures of most of these aren't relevant. I'm not paid by OpenEyes direct to do anything like this. I do have some time in my job plan to cover some of the local and national work within OpenEyes, but I don't get paid directly. So what I was going to do today is give you an overview of OpenEyes and sort of our implementation, because I think it's often quite useful to see the journey that we've been on, because it's going to reflect what others might end up doing. And then just walk you through some kind of pathways in, firstly, the outpatient services, and then secondly, a surgical pathway, just so you get a feel of the system and the different things that are possible to do within it. And just by way of introduction, a lot of this will probably be pretty, you'll be aware of a lot of this, but ophthalmology is different to other services, and in the hospital at least, I think it does warrant having its own system for these reasons. So it has the most outpatient attendances for any other hospital specialty, so we have high volume. And cataract surgery, by example, is the most frequently performed operation in the NHS, over 500,000 a year. So again, the high volume warrants having things that are designed to deal with that in an efficient way. And we also have a high number of procedures performed in clinic, like injections, lasers, and minor operations. And again, trying to deal with these in an efficient way can be helped by having a sophisticated electronic system that is customized to do it and built for that, rather than some generic hospital-wide systems which do offer ophthalmology, but maybe are more focused on getting things really well done for ward patients and more complicated stuff. And this might not be the case now, but certainly recently ophthalmology has had the most never events compared to any other specialty. And that's partly because of the high volumes and us trying to do more than maybe we are comfortable doing. But certainly having some of these sophisticated systems can reduce never events, and that has been demonstrated in various implementations. And I'll show you a little bit about the cataract pathway, which really does make things pretty robust and nearly to the point where you would, if you follow the rules, you shouldn't ever have a never event if you follow the rules. And the other thing that's a bit different with ophthalmology is that we're really heavily reliant on imaging and investigations, and unlike the rest of the hospital, this is done in-house using our own equipment that no one else really is interested in. So ophthalmology having its own imaging systems and PACS systems makes sense because it allows us to see the stuff we want to see in the way we want to see it without having to worry about what other people are in the hospital and using systems that they use. So again, separate systems of ophthalmology I think is definitely warranted. Think about the main pressures in the eye department. Number one pressure now with COVID, but also well before this, was about clinic capacity. And if you try and increase clinic capacity, you always are faced by the same issues of lack of space, lack of staff. Whatever you do, you can't recruit enough staff, you can't build a bigger clinic, you can expand into community sites, which is what a lot of places are doing, but you are still limited. And with the other kind of big pressure from the clinician side is that we're trying to improve the quality, trying to make sure that patients have a good experience, that they're not coming back unnecessarily for lots of visits to do little bits here and there to try and have these one-stop pathways. And we're trying to ensure that this is delivered in a safe way. And then in the middle of that are these barriers of these inefficient processes that are pretty historic and have been around in most places for a long time. And I think we all work in places like theatres which they can all be made more efficient. I won't get into the details, but I think we all understand the issues there. There's plenty of admin, which isn't necessarily the most efficient use of our time. There's lots of paperwork. And if you think about clinical processes, just to give you 3 examples of really redundant clinical processes that happen throughout the country, which are a bit of my bugbears. Number one, someone, usually a poor registrar, sitting at the beginning of the clinic, looking through all the notes and signing up dilation drops for every single medical retina patient, every single time they come. I mean, that doesn't need to be done in that way, and that's just the way it's done because there's no better way of doing it. That's really inefficient. Dictating letters at the end of the clinic for routine things like, I do glaucoma, the vast majority of our patients are stable, and they need a brief letter that explains that. But when I was dictating letters, it would take me quite a long time just to dictate the patient's name, their diagnosis, their treatment, their pressures. And then it would take several weeks for it to be typed by a secretary. It would come back to me, I'd have to edit it, I'd have to then send it back to them, then they would then print it out, send it to the GP, and it'll be, well over a month after the appointment when the patient has their letter and the GP has the letter, by which time they would have run out of their drops most of the time. So really inefficient process. And all the forms that we fill in are really inefficient because there's tons of duplication, even from just writing down the patient's name lots of times, or if you're lucky, having sticky labels. But there's tons of stuff like allergies and diagnosis and medications which are duplicated across tons of paperwork, which if you have an electronic system, you can eliminate. In terms of the ideal EMR, and this is for anything that you use, I think the number one requirement for people like ophthalmologists is for it to be fast. We haven't got time for it to be slow and do things that we don't want to do. And when you're using it, you're basically doing it for 2 reasons. To put data in, so you want the ability to enter data quickly, and then you want to read the stuff that's been done in the past. So you want to review historical data really fast in a sensible way that makes sense clinically. And you want it to be user-friendly, ideally graphical, because we're used to having the ability to draw on paper, and a picture is 1,000 words, and having things graphical makes sense when you're reviewing things in a rapid way. And it needs to be versatile because things are changing, people want things done differently, and so it needs to be able to adapt to that. So coming back to our journey at St Thomas's, why we chose OpenEyes, we found it to be fast, especially when it was scaled. We've got now close to 30 consultants covering most specialties. We are predominantly on one site, but it still needs to be an issue about making sure it's not slowing us down. And because we've got lots of fussy clinicians, we want it to be highly configurable and allow it to be future-proof so that people can set it up the way that they want for their own things. And we saw that it was clinically optimized to make things fast. It could be moved towards paperless working, which is pretty much where we are now. It can be used across different platforms. So this is one of the developers running OpenEyes on a Nintendo Wii, which just tells you it can run on any platform, any device that has a web browser, it can run OpenEyes. And we wanted it to be graphical and cover all the stuff that we wanted to do. We wanted to move everything that we do on paper to an electronic system to make things as efficient as possible. We wanted to integrate with our devices, and I'll show you what we've done regarding that, and allow remote access so that people could work from home and do things like virtual reviews of data from home. And it was nice that there was some development control, especially when we were one of the early adopters. We had the ability to input with how things are being shaped for the future of it. And for us, certainly at the time, compared to the other options, it had a long-term low cost. A bit about OpenEyes. It's a web-based EMR for just ophthalmology. It's been developed by a range of hospitals and institutions and individuals to get to the stage where it's at. and it's charitable, not for profit. And the software is available open source, free of charge, but it's generally advisable to be implemented by professionals like Toucan Labs who know what they're doing, because it's not just a website, it's quite a lot more sophisticated than that. The OpenEyes Foundation is managed by the EPR Foundation, and they basically protect the intellectual property to make sure that it is always going to be available. It's not going to just suddenly disappear. There is enough funds in their reserves to make sure that that will be the case. And so they're the custodian, and they support the growth of OpenEyes. They help prioritise the commissioning of what is going to be developed next, and they choose the professional partner, which at the moment, we've said already, is Toucan Labs. And it's always going to remain like that. It's always going to be not for profit, and I think that's nice, and that works well for us. So it can't be sold to anyone, but the nice thing is that the users are part of the community who can influence the development of it. So it is possible to change things to suit what you want. And the great thing is when it's done once, all the different users can benefit from it. So quite recently, Moorfields has signed a large contract to upgrade the version of OpenEyes that they were using, which was their own version, to the version that everyone else is using. And as part of that, to also build some of the things that they've been doing separately, so that now everyone will benefit from some of those things. And I'll show you the consent work, which is quite a nice development. So there's a board of trustees, two consultant ophthalmologists, David Hayder and James Morgan, Professor James Morgan from Cardiff, and David is in Bolton, and they've been using OpenEyes for a long time. Andy Barker is the IT director from East Kent, who have been using OpenEyes for a very long time as well. And Peter Coates is the managing director, and Michelle Tier is a senior trainee in London, actually works at St Thomas's now. And then separate to that, there's a clinical design authority, and basically each site that is signed up to using OpenEyes can nominate one person, who's usually a clinician, doesn't have to be a doctor though, to be part of the design authority. So they get to be part of the process where new developments are going through that vetting process and refinement and prioritization, and they get to input at that. Separate to that, there are subspecialty groups when certain areas of the program are being worked on. So a year or two ago, they were working on the strabismus module, and so there were people from the different sites that are using OpenEyes were nominated, and orthoptists, nurses, doctors were able to form that group and develop the strabismus module, which is great. And there are these online forums where you can contribute to suggestions and discussions, and the development's ultimately done by, these are the main developers now, ABHR, Toucan Labs, and CAMS, which is at Cambridge. And a lot of the development so far has been funded by NHS Digital, various grants from trusts, as well as some digital companies. So currently, these are the trusts that are using OpenEyes. Bolton and East Kent have been using it for a long time, West Suffolk and St Thomas's for about 4 years. And then, recently there's been an exponential rise in the number of people using it. And as well as this, there's a few other trusts that are nearly signed the dotted line to take OpenEyes, but I haven't put them on here. And quite a few that are migrating from other systems like Medisoft to using OpenEyes. Moorfields will be using it later on this year. All of Wales and all their health boards are going to be using a single system, single OpenEyes instance. So people in any of the health boards can see the same record for the patient across the whole country. And similarly in Scotland, the whole of Scotland will be using OpenEyes. And again, there'll be free exchange of the patient records between different sites, and there are some centres in Australia that are also using it. So just before I come on to the demo, so just some of the key features in outpatients, I'll go through some of these things that are available with OpenEyes, and as well as that, the interventional pathways, so like doing operation bookings and notes and having a theatre diary within OpenEyes. And then there's lots of other stuff which I probably won't get around to showing you, but there's a very extensive virtual clinic module which can be configured quite a lot to suit what you want. So, for us, we had funding approved in 2015-16, and then started procurement 5 years ago and went live 4 years ago now almost. And from our minimum requirement, which I would always recommend, is when we said we wouldn't start using OpenEyes until the IOL master was fully integrated, so that when a patient has a scan on the IOL master, the data is automatically transferred into OpenEyes, no transcription of anything. So that took a little while for everything to be done internally, but that was done. We also had some sort of hardware requirements around getting 2 screens in each of the clinical bays, because it's a web window. You can have multiple windows open, and it's quite nice having windows open for previous visits for the patient, as well as one that you're looking in, or if you want to look at an OCT browser, you can have that in a separate window. So I would definitely recommend that. And we wanted to get lots of working printers because, funnily enough, we ended up printing out more things because we were printing off letters to give to patients at the end of clinic. We were having to print off prescriptions and consent forms at the time. So we needed printers at each bay, and we eventually got that. We also later on integrated a visual acuity testing system called CompLog, and I'll show you some screenshots of that. And then a bit later, it took a while to get it set up, mainly again internally with completing constraints for our IT colleagues. It took almost 2 years to get Zeiss Forum set up, but it was been really good since we've had that, because it's linked to our clinic lists. So when a patient is booked into clinic and they arrive, all their details are sent to the devices. So when they go to have a visual field test, no one needs to type out their name and details. They're on a list, the person doing the test just selects their name, and then there's no risk of having duplicate records. It just merges with their existing records. So that works really well, and the glaucoma workspace, for me at least, has been fantastic, and I couldn't live without it now. In terms of the visual field analysis, it's great. So our implementation was kind of parallel in the different clinical services. We started in cataracts because most people had some involvement in the cataract pathway, so it was a way of them getting used to using OpenEyes without having to completely slow them down at the beginning over that learning curve. And then we implemented it in the different specialties one by one, and it took a while to get through all of those, up until the point when COVID struck, and then we stopped getting paper notes, and basically everyone ended up using OpenEyes at that point, and now everyone uses it in the whole department, including the emergency clinics. And then parallel to that, we kind of slowly took away the different paper processes in the surgical pathway, from pre-assessment to bookings, theatre diaries, all the way to removing all consent forms and prescriptions. There are different approaches to do it. One is a big bang where you switch everything at once to an EPR, which might work in some places. We felt it wasn't going to work for us, so we did a very much phased approach, starting with all, in glaucoma at least, all new patients, because it meant, we wouldn't then create more work for transcribing those later on. And then certain clinics just moving patients over and just moving them over the course of 2 years, really, from paper to OpenEyes. And there's tons of customization that you can do. And when you go through an implementation phase with Toucan Labs or whoever you end up using, there's plenty of customization that they can guide you through, and the out-of-the-box version works well, but you really get a lot out of it by customizing it to suit what you want, and it's very easy to do that. So I will quickly take you into a live version. So it's a website. This is a test website, and there are lots of different versions, but you have a username that you log in, which is usually the same username as your Trust ID. There's a home page where there's a messaging system internally where users can send messages about patients to different users. So, if you see patients jointly between clinics, you can message each other via that. We don't tend to use it that much, but I know lots of places do. And the first really nice thing that you find is that when it's linked to your patient administration system, your PACS, you get a live clinic list. So you can have any date, so it's defaults to today's date. These are obviously test patients, but in the real life, you have the clinic list of patients when they're booked, and when they arrive, there's a separate column that gives you their arrival time, so you know who's arrived. You can search for dates in advance, so you know what's booked in the future and going backwards. And just something simple like that is a huge benefit compared to having to log on to a separate system, if you are able to find out just what's booked in your clinic next week. Within these clinic lists, there are pop-ups here where you can hover over here to get a summary of the patient. So let's find someone who's got a fair bit of stuff on here. This is the summary of the patient with their allergies, their alerts, their most recent vision, refraction, CCT, CVI status, diagnoses, surgical history, what medications they're on, what stopped medications they were on previously, family history, surgical history. In the live version, you'll have their appointments, both all their future appointments that are booked, as well as all their previous appointments, so you can find out which clinics they've been seen in, which consultant's been seeing them very rapidly. This is all from the work list without having to click into their record. And that's, a huge time saver if you're trying to review, for instance, a large clinic where you're supervising, or you have to reschedule a big clinic because someone's off sick, things like that. So it's a nice feature. Back to that. So if we just to show you what a patient's record is like, actually, let me go to someone who's got. So you just click on their name and you can see it loads up their record quite fast. It takes you to a patient overview page where the same sort of information that I just showed you on that pop-up is displayed with their summary of their recent core data and their diagnoses and procedures, medications. At the top here, you have the patient's name and their details. You can click to copy their patient number if you have to look at their record in another system, for instance, you can do that. And up here are these little icons that when you hover over, it gives you access to this information. So it tells you their allergies and any alerts for the patient. This will give you their demographics, their GP details, any additional contacts. This will give you their management summary. So if they are being seen in different specialties, it will give you the most recent management plan from each specialty. It will tell you, if you hover over here, who saw the patient, past appointments, and you can build up lists of problems and plans here. And then this is the main one that clinicians would look at quite a lot. And the nice thing about this is that it's always there at the top of the patient record, and you can see that at any point when you're in the middle of an examination. You can always look up here to find what medications they were on, what procedures they had, what diagnoses are active, and that's a nice, really nice feature. And then down on here you have a list of events when the patient was seen or had something done, and there are different icons there which you'll get the hang of knowing what they are, but some of them, the red ones, tend to be interventional procedures. The yellow amber one are examinations, and the blue ones are letters or consent forms. And the other nice thing is that if you hover over here, you will get a preview of what that what is on that event, so without having to open it. And again, you can effectively like scan through pages on a paper record really fast. It's a bit small, so you can scale up it so you can read things more clearly if it's a bit small, depending on your screen. But it's a really nice way. One of the things that you'll find in an electronic record is you're often constrained into looking at what you're doing now. And for things like glaucoma and many other ophthalmology specialties, a large part of what you're doing is dependent on what happened in the past. And you want to be able to look back at what was their last appointment, what was their first appointment. And having something like this really allows you to do that easily. I'll switch back to the presentation now. So the other nice thing is that you can have quite structured clinic workflows. So because, as you know, OpenEyes originated from Moorfields, where it's such a large hospital, you have a completely separate glaucoma service working in a silo compared to a medical retina service, compared to VR. They would actually want things configured their own way. And that is still possible in OpenEyes now, because services can build things like they wish. So you can have workflows built to mimic what you would do in real life. So in a real life, for us at least, patients come in and have their vision tested by a technician, and then they move from there to the next queue, which is usually to see in a new glaucoma clinic, for instance. They would then go on and see a nurse or optom who would do the history, some of the basic tests, and then they would move on to see a consultant who might do the gonioscopy or disc assessment and make the plan. So you can actually configure the workflows to fit like that, so that they're broken up and saved at each point when it passes on from one clinician to the next. So, like I mentioned earlier, we integrated CompLog so that you test the vision on a computer screen, and then it is imported into the patient record with one click. And we worked out that if the technicians were to manually input this, it will be about 1 million clicks a year for our outpatient service, which isn't huge, but 1 million clicks a year is a lot. So the way that CompLog works is when you are doing a visual acuity, there's a button on here that you would click, and it would then launch CompLog in the corner of a screen. And so you can see here a screenshot of 2 screens, and the patient would be looking at this screen and the technician would be controlling it on this one, and you would just basically do a visual acuity thresholding test and get to the point where it says that's their best vision. And at the end of that, you would click the button here, pull CompLog results, and it would just go straight into the record and save you having to transcribe it, save the risk of any errors occurring there. Like I mentioned, you can split the workflows into different parts of the team. So you would have an examination that might be done up to a point by a nurse. So you might get them to do the history, look at the front of the eye, measure the pressure, or whatever you set it up to do, save it. And then when it comes to the doctor, they would click on another button and it would open up different things for the doctor to do. So if I go back to the live system, if we were creating a examination, you would just go to whatever service you would do. You can have different types of clinics set up. So in glaucoma, you might have, or in cataract, I think there's a few set up. You might have different ones for one-stop listing, follow-up, post-op, or whatever. And then you would be able to create any of these events, which I'll go through some of them later on, but the most common one you would do is an examination. And when you click on it, it would then open up whatever you have set to open up as a template for a guide for the user to fill in. So you can decide exactly what is useful for the patient, for the patient to be recorded against at any clinic, and it's just there as a prompt. If the user doesn't want to fill in, for instance, the family history, they could just click on a button here and it would remove it. If they wanted to add something else, there's a list of all the different examination things that you can add. And this is actually, there's a lot bigger list now on the most recent version. But if you wanted to record a CCT, you would just click CCT, and then it would open up the appropriate box where you can fill in the information. And the way you basically add information into it is there are boxes where you can type, which is fine, you know, that's easy to do. But there are also these shortcuts where you've got pre-defined terms or phrases or sentences that you can use to just build up sentences, which is far quicker than typing. And if you wanted to, you could actually even dictate straight into these boxes just using Windows dictation software to save time. But actually setting these up to work for what you would want, you know, you could predict in the majority of people what you would ask in a history for a cataract patient or a glaucoma patient, and you can set that up in here so that it's different for glaucoma and cataract. And that will save you a ton of time, and you don't have to type much in most situations. There are lists that again can be configured for each service so that you have common previous operations. Medication lists can be separated for different services. You can have common systemic medications and topical medications in lists. But basically, there's a whole large long list of different examination things that you can record, and they're all structured, and it's very flexible to do what you want for each patient. So the idea is that you record structured data once, and you can use it many times. So, you know, allergies, although they need to be checked from time to time, you know, you record them once and they're always visible. Medications, again, they might update over time, but you record them, they're available. CCT, things like that. You know, it makes sense to not have to repeat that. And if you think compared to what we used to do, we used to have these paper performers in a glaucoma clinic, and our, you know, dedicated optoms would diligently sit down every clinic, write down the patient's name, write down what medications they're on, their baseline pressure, their CCT, what operations they've had. They'd spend 15 minutes at the beginning of each patient just summarizing what's happened in the past. And now you don't need to do that because it's all there available for you to see straight away. So like I said, there are, you know, tons of structured ways of recording things like family history, social history. This is just a video that I've recorded for another purpose. And it just allows things to be recorded really quickly. We've talked about the shortcuts where you can have these sentences. This is our glaucoma configuration where the kind of things that you might record for follow-up visits allow you to record things very quickly. Stops you from having to type. You can also control what data is recorded so that, you know, depending on how stringent you want to be, you can leave it very flexible to users so that they record what they want, or you could force users to record certain things that you think important, such as allergies. So in our emergency clinic, the allergy box is compulsory. They have to fill that in before they save the record. Otherwise, they won't be able to move it on. So we know what every patient's allergy status is. You can do the same about diagnosis. You can ask, you know, this is our configuration for a glaucoma new clinic so that we remind our team to check about NTG risk factors, for instance. You can set certain risks for patients. So for us, we want to know whether they've got asthma, and again, it will flag it up if you haven't completed it. You can set it to ask about pregnancy status, and it's smart. You can say it will only come up if the patient is female or within a certain age range, so it won't be asking you if an 85-year-old man is pregnant, which would be irritating. And then there are things like follow-up, which you would always want completed. And again, you can see here the delete button is grayed out, which means the user can't complete the examination without recording the follow-up. So they're just ways of controlling what's recorded. I think I've shown you some of the patient overviews already, but as time goes on, there's a ton of information that can be recorded there, and it might be quite overwhelming to see all this now, but you get used to it, and you find you'll be able to go to where you would want to be able to find the medications or previous surgery. You go to that point very quickly, and it becomes easy to read. I'll show you that. And then there are lots of other ways of finding previous information. So there's a whole list of previous intraocular pressures that you can pull up. Any examination, you can click a button to display all the previous examinations of that type. So you can see every single previous anterior segment examination here, and the date it was done and by whom, and scroll down. And if you want to copy it forward for today's visit, you click a button that will bring it into today's visit, where you can edit it or just accept what it was before if it hasn't changed. That's another shortcut. There are also these patient dashboards. So this is a glaucoma patient who's had lots of stuff done in the test patient. You can zoom into certain areas like here where they've had surgery, and you can look at their intraocular pressure trend. You can switch between one eye and two eyes. It overlays on the top here what medications they were using at the time. It tells you up the top here what their central corneal thickness is, what their first pressure is, what their maximum pressure is. So these kind of dashboards become really useful when you're doing virtual reviews, because in one screen you can kind of gauge exactly what's going on with that patient and what's been going on in the past. So that's really helpful. Like I mentioned, the work lists from your clinic get pushed into the devices, which is a really important safety feature, but also a time-saving feature. And there is a link that can be switched on between OpenEyes and Zeiss Forum. So here, the users moved onto Mary Curie, and then Zeiss Forum automatically moves onto the same patient, so they're synchronized. Again, that's a nice efficiency feature, so you don't have to search for the patient on both systems, but also it's a good safety feature. It means you're not looking at a different patient's imaging compared to who you're looking at their examination stuff. And then we've set up various reports from the Zeiss devices to be imported into OpenEyes. So things like the structure function report, it will generate it when a patient has had a visual field and an OCT scan done within a certain time window, and send that into OpenEyes. And it's a really nice way of getting a good overview of glaucoma patients, really useful for new patients to make a decision on. And you can set that up for visual fields to come in automatically. I think the Zeiss software is really, really good for visual fields, and you probably want to view it within the Zeiss software. But you can, in a VR clinic, if you were doing a one-off visual field, you probably wouldn't want to bother going into Zeiss Forum. It'd be quite nice if the visual field is automatically imported into OpenEyes, and so you can set that up, and that is quite helpful. Like I said, there's tons of virtual clinics where you can basically create lists of patients who have had data acquisition at a certain point in time, and then add them to a list for reviews. So we've got lots in glaucoma, but also some bit more unusual ones for hydroxychloroquine screening, sickle cell screening, diabetic retinopathy, for IAH diagnosis, different clinic lists, and they basically are added into a review list. You can set priority status for the different patients. You can give a preview of certain information that you want, like for a glaucoma clinic, you put the pressure and CCT on there, and the person reviewing the patient can add any special notes on there. So the person who took the data can add notes there for the next person who's reviewing it. And then when you're ready to review it, you click a button here, and it takes you on to the next step where you have different questions that you can configure to do the review, and directly from here create prescriptions or letters. So it's quite an efficient way to review high volumes of virtual patients. And we've done a similar sort of thing for eye casualty, where there's basically a live tracking of patients through our eye casualty department, which gives you their breach time and obviously what they're in for, their triage status, and allows you to kind of get an overview of who's in an eye emergency. We have maybe 100 patients a day coming through it. And we've also set up internal referrals with an OpenEyes. So, we've set certain questions that can be asked and drop-down menus for different clinics where you would refer patients, and that works quite nice. So prescriptions, we took a bit of convincing to get the pharmacy to agree to use OpenEyes to generate the prescriptions. It's not a full electronic prescribing system. I would describe it as a way of replacing handwritten prescriptions, which are terrible because of lots of reasons, and replacing them with legible, directly modifiable prescriptions from OpenEyes. So once we convinced them that it was a safe and sensible thing to do, they've never looked back, and they completely are happy with what we've been doing. And they actually are able to create a live formulary. So there's a list of medications that can be prescribed for OpenEyes. So we can't prescribe morphine or chemotherapy. There's only a list of eye drugs and some basic analgesics that we can prescribe. But that formulary is live. So the chief pharmacist for ophthalmology, if something goes out of stock, they can deactivate it from pharmacy and we can't prescribe it. And so it saves patients going back and forth between clinic and pharmacy. You can also set up these standard prescription sets. So there's a little quick video here. This is how you do a prescription, just create a prescription event. And then these are the standard sets where you can set things like post-op regimes. As often, as configurable as you like. So this is someone post-surgery who's going to have Dex and Chlor and some Diamox. If you want to add additional drugs, you can, and these are broken down into different categories if you like. Or there's a search bar up here where you can free text search and add that in. And once you've decided the treatment regime, you just save and print the prescription. Some pharmacies are happy to just do it as electronic prescriptions, and you would just click save then, and they would be able to view it on their system. Clinic letters are also really easy to be done from OpenEyes. It's a good thing, I think, that you don't need to waste secretarial time to dictate letters. They've got other things they can help with. So nearly all of our clinicians don't dictate anymore. They just do letters directly from OpenEyes. And basically, you can set them up as complicated or as simple as you like to pull information from the examination. You can have different ones for different clinics, but essentially it will pull things like the history, the medication, the management plan, the follow-up, and you can set additional text at the beginning, add contact details at the end, add additional information if you want, and edit things on the letter if you like as well. But if you set the letters up well for the common stuff, you don't need to do anything, and within 10 seconds you can generate a letter, print it off, give it to the patient. For us, half our battle is getting the patients to use the right medications, and having a printout that you can talk it through with them is really helpful. There's lots of service level analytics once you've been using it for a while that can be quite useful. So this is a list of overdue follow-ups that it will generate, and it can be just the glaucoma ones. So when you see a patient, you set the follow-up period, and if you say you set it for 2 months and it's gone beyond 2 months and the patient hasn't had another examination, they will start to go onto this plot. And then you can click on a certain bar on there and it will take you to the list of those patients. So it's just a really easy way to find potentially patients who've been lost to follow-up as a good safety feature. There are other things that you can look at for follow-ups that are coming up or waiting times for new patients. And there's a diagnosis quick analytics thing where you basically can choose from a list of diagnoses. And if you want to find all patients with secondary glaucoma, you can click on that list and it will take you onto that. And there are other more sophisticated searches as well. Similarly, for medical retina, there are things where you can do plots for change in vision according to different treatments, different diagnoses, and it would generate this data fairly quickly. This is all test data, so it doesn't look all that sensible, but it does in real life. And you can do these more complex searches. So here we're searching for people who've had a trabeculectomy and are on a medication now, which we've said is Safitan. And then you could run a search, or you could save searches for people here who are on eye drops and who've got good vision. You could find people then who've got high pressures, and again identify people who might have been missed for treatment, and then find out what's going on with them. So okay. So I'm going to move on for the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes maybe, to the surgical pathway. Does anyone have any questions at this stage, or should I just finish this bit and then take questions at the end? Getting some nods. I'll just do this. Yeah. So surgical pathway, before we used OpenEyes, we had paper and lots of paper. When you saw someone in clinic, it would be a big sigh because it would take 20 minutes just to fill in the paperwork. We would fill in a form on the hospital system to say that they're having surgery. We would then fill in another ophthalmology paper pack where you would rewrite the patient's name, their allergies, their procedure, and that would follow them through for their surgery. We would do a separate referral form for pre-assessment where all that information is repeated. We would add them to a calendar. We would then handwrite consent forms for everything apart from cataracts. So it would be a massive amount of work to do just for listing a patient for routine surgery. So we slowly replaced some of this stuff with the features within OpenEyes. So for cataracts, there is a built-in PCR risk calculator based on the quite old, but the only thing available now, the old NOD data from 10 years ago, where you set the different parameters. And most of this will be called in for the examination. So if you see someone and say they've got pseudoexfoliation, it will say yes on here. And you can override it or add any other information. And it gives you then a PCR risk for that eye compared to the standard patient. And you can see there's a difference between the two eyes there. And we use that to stratify our patients into high, medium and low risk patients. You can do the CAPCOM5 with an OpenEyes. It's just a simple form where the question are answered. But there's quite nice analytics for CAPCOM5 once it's in the systems. And then we started doing all our pre-assessments within OpenEyes. Just, most of it, you'll find that a lot of it becomes unneeded because a lot of the information is already available. They don't need to ask all the questions because it's already there, like their allergies and their medications and things like that. And then we started doing operation bookings within it and managing our waiting list within OpenEyes. So there are I'll go through the process in a second. So you can do an operation booking and book them into a specific date and time straight away, or you can just book them and put them on a waiting list. And if you put them on a waiting list, then there's a separate page for managing the waiting list where it can be broken down into different specialties, different consultants, different priorities, and you can use that to schedule patients. And that's what our admin team do for booking things like routine cataracts. Go into doing a operation booking now. Get the right window. Okay. So Charles Darwin, he's got a referral letter in here already, and some biometry, which is test biometry. He's the only patient in here that's got some test biometry. So we are going to assume you would have had an examination. I'll leave all that because it's just tedious to do it in front of you guys. And then to make an operation booking, you would just go to this event. And it's a simple form. If you'd done an examination, it would already have a diagnosis on here, but we have to add it now because there wasn't one. And then you have a list of procedures, and this can be configured for each specialty. So for glaucoma, we've got completely different list of common operations to cataract, to cornea, so it just saves time. You can search for everything on here as well, but we're going to just do a simple phaco. It will then you can set the default time you want to allocate for an operation. So on this system, it's 30 minutes, and then you can change the complexity. So if it's a high complexity, it will automatically increase the time. If it's low, it will automatically decrease the time, and you can set the amount it changes it by as well. You can add comments here. So let's say query vision blue. This will become available later on, I'll show you that. And then you choose the anesthetic type and whether there are any special instructions around medications or pre-ops. Oh, hang on, I think, sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Sorry, let's do it here. Right. That's basically all you need to fill in. You can choose about pre-assessment, let's say none, and then let's schedule it now. So once you have a theatre diary in there, you'll be able to choose the different services and specialties and then book accordingly to that. For now, we're just going to book it onto an emergency list today and then select today. Tell you at the moment we have got no booking scheduled, so we can confirm that. And that's booked. So the next thing you would do then is create a consent form for the patient. This is, this will be the doctor doing the booking. It doesn't take long, so we do it ourselves. And then to create a consent form, you go to consent form. There are at the bottom here some shortcuts to some of the commonly done consents that you might want to do. So the intravenous injections, you can configure this to what you want. But anything that's got a booking will have a direct link here for that booking to create the consent form. And when you choose that, it will pre-populate the consent form with the procedure that you've chosen. So the silent procedure, the anaesthetic type. You can add to it if you want. You can choose any leaflets that the patient has been given. And it will bring in the default risks and benefits that you've configured. And there's some that come in the system, but you can change this. And you can obviously customize it for each patient. You can have some additional common extra risks that you might want to add for patients, and you can add them with ease with just a few clicks on there. And then there's sections on here for additional things like patients' questions and permissions for surgery, etc. And we'll just ignore that and then click Save and Print. And then there is ability now to take electronic signatures. So we are going to say that if you have a tablet device, I've got my phone here, you can use a QR code or web link to just pair your devices. So you can take the signature on the screen here if you just did like this, but let's do it on a separate device. So you can click on here. Click OK, and then I've got on my phone here, I'm not sure you can see it, but I've got the same consent form. I'm just going to sign it and save it. And then you can see it's come up there, IR, it's me signing it. So it just means you can do full paperless consents. And then when it comes to the day of surgery, there's another consent box that comes up for confirmation of signatures and stuff like that. So we spend a lot of time making sure that the consent is kind of up to scratch with what is needed, including consent form 4, and consent form 2 is on there as well. So that's how you do a consent form and operation booking. And then when you come for the day of surgery, there are theatre diaries like this. So I think I booked it for a different date, didn't I? So I booked it on the 14th of March. That's why it's not there. Here we go. So this is the patient here, Charles Darwin. You'd have a full list of patients in your theatre diary. You can filter it obviously for different consultants, different sites, different specialties, and then find your lists going forwards in any date range. There are buttons here that will take you directly to things like the consent form, so you can check it. It will take you directly to the operation booking, and it will take you to the biometry. So if we go to the biometry, you would have a feed from your IOL master that goes straight into here. So this is the biometry. In our real life setting, we also have a PDF of the standard biometry report that comes up here as an icon that you can click and look at. So it's a nice familiar site. You choose the lens within here. So we are doing the left eye. We'll choose a lens. It will tell you in real life when they've had information on here what their visual acuity was, for near vision, the refraction, so all the kind of information that you would look at when you're choosing the lens, and then you save it. And the really nice thing is that once you've done all of that, when you're in theatre, you can click a button like this and it takes you to a whiteboard where, oh, it's the wrong patient. To go back to that patient with the biometry, it will bring all the information from the biometry into that view. So here we've got the name of the patient, the procedure they're having, there's a coloured bar indicating the complexity, the lens choice that you've made, what the predictive outcome is with what formula, a diagram that shows you the axis. Remember when I made the booking, I wrote about vision blue, so those comments are pulled through into here. Any additional comments can always be added when you're doing like a notes review pre-op or on the morning of surgery. information about the biometry and AC depth is on there. So kind of the information a clinician doing cataract operation wants to know. If they're having any other operation, you still get all of these 6 blocks. You don't get the lens choice, obviously, if you're not doing a lens implant, but this is still really useful. And all their allergies, all their risks appear on here. So in one view, you've got everything you need to do your WHO timeout, and that's how we do it. We have this open. We use this as a point of reference to check the consent against, to check the patient wristband on. And on here, there are also links to take you to the biometry or the consent form as well, all within this page. And if you think this through, this is basically how you would eliminate a never event. You know, the patient has come in, their details have been pushed from the PACS system onto the biometer, and the biometry has been taken on there, directly linked to their record. So when you choose the lens, you're only going to choose it for that patient's biometry. You can't choose someone else's. If there's any mismatch in that data, it won't get imported. It will go to a separate list. So you won't have it in their record. You choose the lens according to this, you know, unless you actually physically pick up the wrong lens and don't notice it's the wrong lens on here. And unless you physically do an operation on the wrong eye, you pretty much can't get a never event because you're following what's the planned surgery on here. So it's a really important safety feature, which is why I say don't start using this until you've got the IOL masters linked up, because it's such a huge benefit. And then the other thing, of course, is once you've got all that information on there and you're doing the op note, the op note is then just a few clicks. You go to op note, it will have a list of procedures that are already booked, where you just click on a button to make the op note. It will pull in, it should actually, it hasn't done it here, but it will pull in on a real instance the lens choice that you've made. I think there's some issue on it because there's a different thing on here, but normally it'll pull in the lens type, power, and predicted refraction all into here, so you don't have to type that. And all you basically need to fill in is whether there's any complications, confirm the anesthetic type, and then any post-op instructions, which again are configurable phrases that you just click on to add. And then when you've done the op note, you can save it and you can set it to generate the standard GP letter straight away. You can set it to create a letter to the optom straight away. You can create a standard prescription straight away as well, or choose from a list of common prescriptions. And that's all done with a few clicks. So that is the kind of surgical pathway, which I think is one of the really strong points in how we have benefited from using it. Let's go to this. So we do like all our surgical admission on the day of surgery and discharges as a sort of examination on here. I've shown you the theatre diaries and they are so useful. You know, we actually in glaucoma, we kind of manage our own lists because we like to control it and know what cases are prioritised over others, and it's actually far easier to do it ourselves. So we do that ourselves and just get all the paperwork done by our admin colleagues. And I've showed you all of this with the discharge letters. And then the nice thing is that you have all your outcome data within there. So within the cataract analytics, you have a funnel plot with the PCR risk. These are individual surgeons on here, where if you hovered over them, it will give you their name as a super user. You can see all the surgeons and see who this one at a 20% PCR rate is. This is real life. This is our data, but obviously it's anonymized because I haven't shown you any people's names. You can look at complication profiles. So if you want to find all the drop nuclei, you click on that, and it will bring them up within this date range that you set. You can do an analysis of visual acuity pre-op versus post-op and set it for different types of unaided glasses, whatever you choose. Similar sort of thing for refractive outcomes. So this is actually, again, real data. Here are the basic one patient with aqueous misdirection problem, why they've ended up so myopic. And there's a graph that tells you about what not data you have and haven't completed. And as I say, there's some analyses around Kaplan 5. We're not really using it that much, so we don't have anything in there. But this is the standard cataract stuff. And we're hoping to do very similar, really easy to use analytics for glaucoma and medical retina, where you can press a single button and look at the outcomes, success outcomes for a glaucoma operation, for instance, or similarly, the visual response from different anti-VEGF treatments or laser treatments. So just to finish off now, we are using pretty much no notes in outpatients. We have one sheet of paper which follows the patient around their journey, just so we know where they are. The most recent version of OpenEyes actually has a a patient pathway thing where you can actually track the patient digitally and set tasks like visual fields or biometry for the patient, which then get ticked off as they go along, so you know where the patient is, and that will mean you don't really need any paper to follow the patient. As I said, we do all our clinic letters, referrals, prescriptions in OpenEyes, and I think it's really had a massive benefit for our efficiency. And you know, we are down to 3 secretaries in the department for 30 consultants, and a lot of them are doing non-secretarial stuff. They're kind of acting more like PAs. Our theatres are paper light, they're not paperless. We still have some booklets that are trust mandated that we have to use, but the timeout is definitely centred around that digital whiteboard that I showed you, and that's a really useful safety feature. Having notes available and having the ability to check the notes remotely to know whether a patient's had a pre-assessment, whether they've had biometry, reduces things like on the day cancellations. It means, you know, you can book lists appropriately. There's definitely improved safety, and you have a ton of audit data that you'll be able to use later on. And that's it really. You know, I've got to thank a lot of people in the department. We've had project managers, and this is something that I'd recommend if, you know, you're going to implement something, any EPR, you need people who are not clinicians, whose job really is to implement it and support it. You know, even once it's up and running, there's tons of stuff to do, training of new users, updates, troubleshooting. And so we've got one full-time person who does mainly OpenEyes and some other kind of IT stuff within the department. And there's, you know, huge thanks to people like James and David, who've done a load of stuff over many years to get things to where they are. And the 2 kind of lead designers, Toby Fisher, who does the way things look, and Toby Biscoe is the core of sort of the product and understands and has been with it for so long and designs everything. And then these partners. So we, before Toucan Labs were the preferred partner, there was a company called ABHR who were the people who implemented our installation. We use them. Toucan Labs are a big company, they've taken over. And then the Aperta Foundation oversee everything. And it's 3 o'clock, so I will stop there and take questions.
That's great. Thank you ever so much for that, Ian. Really appreciate it. Clinical people, initially, have you got any questions for Ian? You've stunned them into silence with that.
Ian, I'm Deputy Service Manager of Ophthalmology. Thanks very much. That was an excellent demo on the product. But we've used the whiteboard. I mean, the whiteboard looks excellent for to prevent never events. Do you have a trust-wide operating beta booking system? Like we use something called Ormis. Does OpenEyes speak to Ormis? Because we'd still have to likely use Ormis from a trust management and inpatient bed booking process.
Yeah.
But it looks like OpenEyes encompasses it all.
It does. So again, it's negotiation with the trust about, you know, what is the best use of everyone's time and what works well. So there is a separate theatre diary system for all theatres, which basically someone in our admin team, they transcribe the theatre list onto that system kind of a few days before surgery, just when it's kind of locked and not going to change. But actually, in terms of knowing what's booked, OpenEyes is the kind of master record, and it's just copied onto the other one. And we don't really have, well, we do, they do, when someone is added to the waiting list for surgery, they are noted that that's their status on our PACS system, that they're awaiting surgery, but there's nothing else, like the procedure details aren't copied over, it's just the fact that they're waiting surgery.
And I've got another one, it's a bit more granular, I suppose. With a letter management system, does it incorporate like accessible information standards like large font? Has it got any flags?
Yeah, so you can set a patient as requiring large font in their communication preferences, and that then applies to all the stuff that's printed out. All letters, all consent forms go out in large font to the patient. You can configure each template for different recipients. So we write all our letters addressed to the patient, and they get copied to the GP. So they're sort of patient-friendly language, and the fact that you're not having to type stuff hopefully would mean you're not putting in loads of ophthalmology jargon and acronyms that no one's going to understand, and using stuff that GPs and patients will understand. So we do it that way round, and then our letters get sent electronically to our GPs overnight. So at midnight, the letters are finalised, and most of our local GPs from our catchment area have electronic transfers of letters that get sent over. And the ones that don't, they go into a physical print queue where someone prints them off and then they get posted. But patients get, if they're in the clinic with you, they get a copy of the letter straight away, which I think is a major improvement.
That's excellent. No, that sounds really good. And with your things like cataract waiting list, Do you ever enter things like data referral so you can see? I know priority is really good because you can differentiate your patients of high, medium, and low. Do you ever do wait lists as well?
So that information, I suppose, is on the PACS system, because they get that's where their RTT time is tracked.
That's fine. Yeah, because I imagine we do the same, but it's just that extra level of detail.
I mean, there is a new thing that's going to be added into OpenEyes where you can do your outcome form within OpenEyes, and then that will have the ability to then do that. But equally, actually, most people will still need to transcribe it onto their main system, so it's still going to have that option. And
just one more for me, I think, when we've got reports for patients who are overdue follow-ups, and obviously we're focusing on glaucoma, I imagine if you've got, you know, your diabetic patients, you can search for patients who were seen 11 months ago, you could run a monthly report, and you could just drill down that level of data. And
so you know the clinic lists are from whenever you go live, they will have all the clinic lists from that time forward, so I can go back 3 years and see who I saw on that date, who I operated on, and that graph, that histogram I showed you is basically automatically generated, so when they go overdue, they go onto that plot.
Excellent,
yeah. You could use that as a way. It's not perfect, I'll be honest, it's not perfect yet, but you know, it wouldn't take much to really improve it, and get it really useful, so you can see who's been waiting a really long time and find those names very quickly, and it's a good.
That'll be the starting point for us. That sounds really good. Excellent. That's everything for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Has anybody else got any questions? They're dying to ask. No. Right. Is that somebody? No. Well, can I say a big thank you to everybody for attending? What I'm going to suggest is we have a 10-minute break so everyone can grab a quick cup of tea. If you're clinical, if you want to stay on, feel free, but we're going to go on to sort of the more technical aspects of the system. I know Clayton's got lots of geeky tech slides to show us, so feel free to stay, but don't feel you have to if you've got better things to be doing this afternoon. So if we say come back at 3:15, would that be all right? And thank you again, Ian, that's really good, really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, see you soon.
Thank you, Ian. Cheers.